Vicky was just 500 yards from her home but disappeared without trace.
This was clearly the work of a deeply sick and troubled mind. My name is Peter Bleksley. I'm a former Scotland Yard detective. And today I'm talking about the case of 17-year-old Victoria Hall, who went missing way back in 1999. Victoria had gone to a nightclub called Bandocks with a friend, and she left there at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Her and her friend went to get some food from a nearby restaurant, and they parted company at 2:20 a.m. Victoria was just a few short yards from her front door. Tragically, she was never seen alive again. Some 5 days later, her naked body was found in a ditch near Underhill, some 25 miles from where she had last been seen. That murder has remained stubbornly unsolved to this day. But in 2019, Suffolk Police reopened the investigation. 2 years later, they interviewed a man who was at that time in prison, where he still is today. And only a few days ago, the police took that man from the prison, where he is serving a whole life sentence, and questioned him after informing him that he was arrested for Victoria's murder. That man has been returned to prison, and the police have never named him, but the media have. And I suspect the reason for that is they do not want to be seen to have jeopardised any possible future trial. But of course, the cat is well and truly out of the bag in this regard, because virtually every media outlet has named convicted serial killer Stephen Wright, otherwise known as the Suffolk Strangler. In 2006, over a 6-week period, Wright killed 5 women: Gemma Adams, Tanya Nicol, Annalie Alderton, Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols. All the women were sex workers, and Wright frequently used prostitutes in his home city of Ipswich. Prior to this, some years before, Wright had lived in Norwich. And I mention that because there are a number of other unsolved cases which various people like criminologists, retired detectives and the like have suggested Wright could be responsible for. Some of those investigations are ongoing, as of course is the investigation into the murder of Victoria Hall. Victoria's body was found naked, as were all the other victims of Wright. During this 6-week reign of terror, where so many women were petrified to go out on the streets of Ipswich and the entire city was gripped by fear, once he had killed a victim, he stripped them naked and positioned their bodies, sometimes in the crucifix position. The murder of Wright's last victim occurred on the 9th of December 2006, and 10 days later, on the 19th of December, Wright was arrested.
He was trapped by methodical police work. Officers arrested the 49-year-old when DNA found on the last 3 victims matched a sample taken from Wright following his conviction for theft a few years earlier.
He was charged and stood trial, found guilty of all 5 murders, and was given a whole life tariff, which means he shall never taste freedom again. This was clearly the work of a deeply sick and troubled mind.
It's rare for a murderer to suddenly start killing late in life. His early years are being looked into.
At the time of these killings in 2006, Wright was in his late 40s, which many psychologists and criminologists have suggested is a very late age for a serial killer to start their offending. When Victoria was murdered, Wright would have been in his early 40s, and thereby we're nudging towards an age where it's perhaps more common for serial killers to start their offending. The reopening of the case into Victoria's murder some 20 years later was prompted apparently by a new witness coming forward. And this is surprisingly common in unsolved cases. Sometimes for a variety of reasons. It may be a public appeal from the police. It may be somebody having their conscience pricked. Or it may be somebody just mentioning a case to somebody who thinks, I was near that location around that time, and then they feel they have information that is relevant and they come forward and speak to the police. But, as detectives will tell you, better late than never. Even from what we know from media reports and the like, I'm not surprised that Wright has been arrested and interviewed for this crime. Look at the similarities. Victoria's body was found naked, as were all the other victims of Wright from his 2006 killing spree. Clothing was not recovered, so somewhere, somehow, Wright disposed of all of that. The method of killing, of course, strangulation. Wright's dirty work was very much strangling his victims. So from those kind of similarities alone, it would appear the police would have had reasonable grounds to arrest Wright and question him about this murder. Many unsolved murders are solved many years after the crimes have been committed, and most frequently that is because of fresh DNA evidence being obtained or analysed and a profile of an offender being achieved. This case is somewhat different in that it appears that witness testimony, witness evidence, is what's prompted the reopening of the investigation. How compelling that evidence is, we shall have to wait and see. But of course, my thoughts remain with everybody who loved Victoria, the people who have to suffer the agony of loss and the ongoing torture and pain of not knowing who was responsible. I sincerely hope that this tragic, awful case is brought to a conclusion sooner rather than later.